Why is the world we live in today so different from the one that the science fiction authors of the 1950s imagined for us? Where are our flying cars? That's exactly the question that nanotechnologist J Storrs Hall set out to answer in his book, Where's My Flying Car? In it, he postulates a number of explanations for what he describes as the Great Stagnation, a period of reduced technological progress occurring from about 1970 onwards. Prior to that time, there was a regular progression of increasing energy availability in human society, what he describes as the Henry Adams curve, this regular doubling of the amount of energy available to human beings for our everyday use. But that slows down after the 1970s, and while in the period since then we have experienced a huge increase of computer technology, a lot of progress in electronics and communication, progress in the physical sciences, in physical technology and energy production and fields like that, has slowed to a crawl. A lot of the dreams of the 1950s, colonies on the moon, flying cars obviously, free energy that's too cheap to meter, has just failed to materialize. A couple of his explanations for why this has happened are really interesting, and I won't give away the book here. I just want to give a quick highlight of what he does in it. One of his explanations is what he calls the Machiavelli Effect. When a new innovation comes along, there are two camps that people fall into for why they resist these new innovations. One are people with established vested interests in that field who feel threatened by it. So that's a fairly obvious one. If automation comes along, then drivers feel threatened, or if a new technology, a disruptive technology comes along, then existing businesses in that field feel threatened. That's one reason. But another reason, a separate camp that people also resist new technologies in, is people who are afraid to be seen as identifying with a risky new venture. An example he gives is cold fusion, this technology that was being developed in the 70s and 80s, which is now discredited. He thinks unfairly, he thinks it still has potential, but anyone who sort of tied their colours to the mast of cold fusion in the past doesn't look too good for it now. So that's one of the reasons he gives. And another is a concept he describes as ergophobia, this tendency of people to be sort of anti-energy period, anti-humans developing and using energy. Unlimited clean energy would be a good thing for environmentalists, but Storrs Hall postulates that some people just don't want humans to have that kind of energy to begin with, that it would encourage us to be even more productive, even more successful, and potentially do even more damage in their eyes to the world. So he classes these people as ergophobics, as people who fear what energy might do, that it might actually improve our lives even further. So that's just a couple of his theories. Now, Storrs Hall puts a lot of effort into making sure that he evidences his claims. He presents a lot of really interesting evidence for how technological growth has slowed down and the harm that's done to our society. Unfortunately, that's one of the book's most significant trip-ups as a reading experience, is he does put a lot of effort into evidencing his claims, which results in chapter after chapter of intense scientific detail on different fields. In the course of writing this book, he really wanted to explain why flying cars don't exist. So he decided in the course of that to become a pilot. And he gives extensive information about how aircraft work, helicopters and light aircraft, and the processes that flying a plane involves. And it's fascinating stuff, but it does tend to divert you from the overall message, which is that these vested interests and the government regulation that they've encouraged massively slowed down innovation in a whole number of fields. Aviation is a really good example. People are still flying around in aircraft that were designed in the 1960s. That would never fly, so to speak, in cars. Like you imagine if all of us were still driving 1960s cars and technology had stalled at that point. It's a really interesting book. So if you can wade through the scientific data, then the fundamental message is really interesting. He doesn't quite get as far to the fundamental as I would like. He identifies a lot of the problems that have slowed down technological progress. He never quite lands on the fundamental point that technology is good for human flourishing, and that should be our standard of what's a good thing and what isn't. And likewise, he recognizes that government resistance has been a major factor, but doesn't quite get as far as identifying that the purpose of government is to protect our rights and keep us free so we can progress these technologies, and shouldn't regulate us at all. So really good book, absolutely 100% worth reading. Just with a caveat of a lot of technical data to wade through, and a fundamental message that doesn't land as strongly as it could, but nevertheless thoroughly recommend this book.